Welcome to Gatorade, an opinion route show to help market research professionals learn and grow. In this podcast, we share stories, insights, and philosophies that unlock enterprise value for the modern market research company. Here's our host, CEO and founder, Terrence McCarran.
All right, we're back on the podcast. Gavin, thanks for joining again. Round two.
Yeah, it's good to be back in the studio.
Yeah, that's it. Always outclassing me. I actually went back to the last podcast you were on, under 2 years ago now, and remarkably still relevant, as a matter of fact. So what I'll probably do is link to this off of this one. This conversation I want to have with you is, sort of part a reflection on AI's evolution. Is second part case study in how to update a workflow inside of an MR operations. And I think it's another part, just a reflection on, man, society has changed so fast. But let's take this really from the lens of your experience. So for those of you who don't know, Gavin Wills is the SVP of technology on our team. He sits on our leadership team. So a couple years ago, a lot of our conversations centered around a little bit of speculation around this sort of emergence of artificial intelligence. And, you kind of riffed a little bit, Gavin, on what might come of it, how it might have a use case or not. Man, things have changed quite a bit in about a year and a half, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I think the last time we spoke on the podcast, we were kind of looking at AI as like, kind of a promising assistant that could help with like certain tasks, and use it like we were kind of fitted in. Whereas now I think it's more like how the company operates, and that's not just in engineering. I know earlier this year, we had a strategic meeting where like AI within the company was like a top priority. So now we see the whole company using AI, not just like early adopters using certain things. And also we have kind of an ecosystem created now. We have shared skills and shared projects. We have an advocate really driving usage. So it's not like ad hoc usage anymore. It's kind of an entire like process and program within the company. And even for like my own team, like we were, as developers, we probably were like early adopters of technology. We're using AI early on to like do code writing. But even that has shifted so much, again, from the ad hoc nature to like a fully fledged kind of process that we have now for writing code. And again, we have our own set of skills within the development team for writing code, making it accessible, doing deployments, anything that's kind of like tech related. And that has helped us, like we might talk about later, about how like product got involved in that process as well, because we created this kind of an environment where that kind of succeeds. So AI is less of a solving kind of like little problems around the place to being really part of your workflow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love how you frame it, because I think that's really true. Developers or just people in technology are obviously, in the business, in the career path of being early adopters. Taking a step back in our industry, market researchers, they get a bad rap, I think, as being not as innovative. I never really saw it that way. I always thought that market research companies in particular embraced innovation, but they were intentional mainstream adopters. So ultimately, they protected the client data, the client insights so tightly that they weren't going to do sort of wild experiments. They wanted some proof points before they started bringing it into their operation. So for me, this is like, I think we've been that way too, in one side, but on the other side of it, I also think we are ahead of a lot of other companies because we did take that jump from it can do this task and what task can it do to more revamping an entire part of the operation of the company around the marriage, I would say, of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. So kind of jumping into it there, I just want to talk about your blog. I would encourage everyone to go read that. This is one of the most transparent pieces we've ever put out there, because you really talked about, and you just alluded, we had strategy meetings earlier in this year where we made a decision and we said, we believe that AI, if used appropriately, can be a massive accelerator of the value that human talent bring to the company and to our clients. And you were, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for you, but certainly I was putting a little pressure on you around, but what does this mean in our tech department? What does this mean from a development and product standpoint? So, why don't you break it down and walk us through a little bit of what the world looked like before this change in terms of how I think of like a feature or a new module and a navigator as sort of being like a project. How did that project go from idea into reality before we made the change?
Yeah, and it was very kind of standard process. So we use a sprint process. So it was a, and you might remember a few years ago we did change from a 2 week sprint to a 3 week sprint. It didn't sound groundbreaking at the time, but it did involve changing our workflow. So we, brought test and UAT into the same sprint, and then we released in that 3 week cycle everybody working on the same focused features, and then we'd release at the end. So we were changing the workflow, but the roles of the people were the same. So the role of product was still, I'm writing requirements, I'm gathering the spec, then I'm handing off to development, and development would build a product. And then they would hand it back to product for UAT and kind of sign off, and then back to development to do deployment. So a lot of kind of back and forth, a lot of handoffs. The 3 week sprint worked for us, but fundamentally we were using kind of standard workflows. In the age now with AI, it just didn't make sense to try to force what we were able to achieve with AI into that workflow. So I think that's ultimately why we decided to pivot.
If you were going to pick on as a good example one task within the overall flow that AI made like obviously redundant, what would be a good example of that?
I think predominantly handoff meetings. Like we're focused now on collaboration from the get go. So when you decide to work on a feature, a developer and a product person work together to get it live, and less handoffs, less kind of sign offs, because those steps in between those handoffs were now super fast. AI could achieve writing requirements much faster than it can before. It can write the code much faster than it was the developer before. So the bottleneck was the waiting to get back and forth. The bottleneck was waiting for that meeting. So I think removing that kind of friction and just allowing the process to flow smoothly made a huge difference. And we kind of like we didn't want to just feel faster. I think in the blog I say, like faster doesn't mean like you're actually delivering stuff better, like faster. You need to put metrics behind it. And we saw in the first 50 days we delivered maybe 47 features. That's a pretty good pace. But even more importantly than that, like 1 in 4 was delivered within a week. So if you put that in perspective, or a product person decides we want to release this feature, and 1 in 4 times that's live in a week. That before that was 4 or 5 weeks. So the crunching out it has been significant.
So actually, that helped me tremendously because we had a company wide meeting where I sort of pulled everyone together and said, "Listen, we believe what I just said earlier that the AI is going to be multiplier and literally a time savings for the work that people have to do every day." I felt in the company, and people even said it in the town hall, which was awesome. Like, I have no idea what this is. I'm a little nervous that you're making me use it. So to me, the way you pivoted measuring those things, that metric of a significant portion of the features being delivered in a week, where in the previous process, nothing, the fastest anything would be able to deliver was a month, right? So what it did is create this sort of wheel effect within the organization that an idea could go from the minds of say a CSM on our operations team into the navigator that fast. It was important as a leadership team to establish our credibility on why this mattered, right? Rapid change, overhaul change in a process is always unsettling, I think, more so in some departments than others. So, focusing on that aspect of it, Gavin, when you brought it to the product and development team that we're going to revamp the entire workflow, it's going to look like this. I know they tend to be early adopters, but how did the team feel? There had to be some, yeah, at least some concerns expressed by some corner of the department, right?
Yeah, I think to be fair, it was probably more excitement than fear. I think the shift was already happening organically. So it was a little bit different to previous pivots and stuff that a company might do to like, oh, we want to streamline this process or change this workflow. Everybody was already working that way. They're already using AI to do the work, but it kind of felt it wasn't fitting the workflow. So everybody kind of anticipated something needs to change. So if anything, they were excited about what that change might be. And
Yeah.
it did feel kind of experimental. It still kind of feels a little bit experimental. We're still using predefined workflows in terms of like a Kanban approach, continuous deployment, but it's just the way we're working is different, and making those two things marry was what was the challenge. I don't think anybody was blindsided by it, to be honest. Like, I think they kind of sensed it was coming. Some might have been surprised by the pace. So, like, I can remember some people saying to me, "So you want us to use AI to write like most of the code now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, the models were getting that good. Like, the models were really, really good. All we really had to do from our side before we fully committed was make sure we have like a quality wrapper around it, like not let it go wild. So we had to like put things in place to control it, but really let it you do what it does really well, which is increase performance.
Yeah.
I think, and kind of on the job security side of it, and people worrying, you hear a lot about, oh, like AI is going to take my job. Like, I see that more as, I guess, AI is going to like change my job. So if you're not changing how you work, that's a much bigger risk long term. Like, you need to adapt to the new way of working with AI. And the new skill that people need is working with that AI efficiently. Like, how do I get the most out of it? But then other skills, just like knowing the product, knowing the customer, problem solving. These are the skills that we want the team to elevate with now, that they have less time that they're actually writing lines of code.
And that's the big thing. I think we have about 2 years now. We all see the headlines, right? Big tech laying off tens of thousands of employees. I mean, we're talking this is affecting consumer insights teams in big tech companies. This is affecting product developers. And in a way, back to that paradigm of early adopter versus mainstreamer, even though we might be on the early phase in the market research industry, we didn't do this 2 years ago either. I mean, you and I were having those conversations in 2024, and we didn't take the jump then, but we also were seeing in the macro landscape that there was wisdom in that. A lot of the companies that did those mass layoffs are now doing mass hirings, right? You have reports coming out from all kinds of management consultancies and industry analysts talking about major Fortune 500 companies have not demonstrated ROI. So, and now the token cost, the expense of running AI in replacement of having talent is actually exceeding what the talent costs were to begin with. So even the financial case study that led to stock surges and the layoffs is now being undone. So to me, this is like, I think my gut on these things is always if it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I think that definitely played out with AI, but does not mean I'm an AI denier either. Like, it's just so obvious that what it can do. And for us, the premise of Opinion Route was always that we wanted to be the way to reinvent work, the way work is done in market research projects. So the talent has less time spent on that hamster wheel of doing tasks and more thinking time to add value to the ultimate client. This fits that premise extraordinarily well. But I'm also not going to trample on how people are feeling as we navigate a transition. This is why sort of this case study has been so great. But let's talk about from a change standpoint within your department. How long was that transition? So you show up one day, you tell them, like, hey, it's already challenging our workflow. It doesn't make any sense. Developers, I want AI writing, significant part of your code, but you have to be the quality assurance wrapper. Obviously that's not something you say one day and then tomorrow everything's changed. Talk to me about the timeline of what that transition was like within Opinion Route.
Yeah, I kind of had planned it to be like a 3-month process, like a Q2 kind of a project, but I think we were fully migrated in about 2 months. And to be honest, that was driven more by the team's eagerness than it was by me. So I was kind of pulled along with the tide. So I had really planned this phase migration. But what kind of happened was, at meetings, people would say, "Oh, when are we going to do this?" And I would say, "That's next month's plan." And it was, "Oh no, can we do it now?" So like they were super eager to experiment and were asking questions and pushing the process along. So ultimately, we were kind of fully migrated from the old process to the new within 2 months. So there's very little friction overall. Even things that I kind of thought would be slow. So the kind of product team, like their role changed the most. So like we discussed earlier, before they used write requirements, then you use kind of UAT at the end, like either side of that process. Now they're involved in the whole workflow of delivering the feature. So that's about running the code locally, dealing with code repositories, code the tooling that we use, deploying to development environments, all these kind of technical stuff with lots of technical jargon and command lines. So I thought the ramp up there would be much longer. But again, like with the proper deployment of the right skills that kind of obfuscated some of that technicality, they were on board really, really quick. So they don't need to know the technical side behind how a deployment happens. They need to know how to use AI and the skill to make that deployment, and it's very easy. So, and you could see like when the moment changed, like when they started running it locally and making changes to the code and seeing it on their screen, like you could see the smile on their faces. Or when they got their first thing deployed live after getting through like in a week, you could see straight away like the light bulb went and like, oh my God, this is so good. Stuff that took long and now I can just see it directly. I can make this change directly. So yeah, that's I think the kind of the excitement that people had made it move very quick. But I think it was significant enough change. So it was pretty intense for 2 months, to be honest. Like, it was a lot of, stuff to be set in place. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the quality gate was quite important. So making sure that, we had kind of review stage, the kind of automated testing, kind of a test gate, all that kind of stuff had to be in place. Because even it's not so much developers worried about like, "Oh, what about what a product are doing with our code?" Because the developers are also using the same AI and the same skills. It's really how can we trust what AI is generating? And to be fair, it is very reliable. We're not finding many issues, but we do need to have that gate, that security gate around it just to make sure.
Yeah, we and look, again, being really transparent, I think as our team beyond even the technology team started embracing using AI more for everyday tasks, like a great thing that I think is the way it creates PowerPoints, right? You could take a Word document, convert it into a fully company branded, templated PowerPoint with visuals. And like to me, our internal structure of communication through PowerPoint has gotten really consistent, which is the desirable. But you also see where AI has its foibles, right? Where something will pop up on a slide that makes no sense, went off the rails. And, ultimately we had a couple months too, just in the business where, we're calling that stuff out. Like, hey, well, what does this mean? It doesn't make any sense. And, the presenter would say, oh, well, Claude did that. No, 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 no. That's not okay. Right. We can't communicate, totally incorrect information or, quote a data point or let a line of code be completely wrong and just wash our hands of accountability because, well, Claude did it. No, this is where, like, ultimately every team member, no matter what the functional area is, has to own the output, right? So this is a way to speed it up, but in a way, just like with Dev, it shifts work into a different bucket, like QAing the thought, the logic stream. When you're producing that yourself, you don't really think about that too much, but the work shifts on the back end a little bit to making sure that this is absolutely right through and through. So that's been kind of interesting as using that as sort of a springboard, Gavin. I'm curious, like you've talked a lot here about the benefits, right? Time savings, speed to launch, the excitement of the team. Those are all like a lot of pros, but like let's be real for a minute. What were some of the setbacks you didn't anticipate? What are some of the headaches that are now systemic that you kind of got to deal with within the workflow too? Like give us some of the real underbelly, not all the glory here.
Yeah, I think in general, like the AI wouldn't have been the weak point of the process. So in terms of code generation, process automation, it really shone through. Like, it was really good. One issue, and it was kind of what you were saying, is I do think there's kind of information overload. So now when you turn for the meeting, everybody has a concept, everybody has a document about it. Like PowerPoints that would have been a few pages are now 5 times longer. So that's definitely a trap people are falling into. I'm not saying don't use AI to create these things, but just be careful of the trap. And the trap is the AI has all your kind of like, history or kind of like knowledge behind it. And it adds a lot of superfluous data to things like text. Like, so you need to, and the mindset I'm trying to get with my team is if you're using AI, make it as concise as possible. Strip out all the regurgitated facts, get it down to like the core question. And then the kind of second layer on that is you also kind of want to make it like you don't, you want to add your flavor to it. So that's kind of the use of AI and just kind of resonate what you were saying there. It just makes it like effortless to say more. So like the discipline now is like saying less, like, like
Yes.
how do I make it less? Like, that's kind of it. With the process, I think the hardest things and the blog kind of identified what we thought might be it it's kind of come true. The first one I think is the kind of ownership, kind of collaboration aspect of it. And this isn't like an issue of whether the team can or can't work together. They're great at collaborating. It's more of like a coordination thing. So, when when do we know that somebody's ready to pick up the next task and who's going to work on it, who's going to be on that team? Before, in the old system, like, a sprint was very well defined. Like, we knew this is in the sprint. Everything has been resourced and calculated how much effort is involved, who's going to work on it. It was very defined. But now it's kind of more looser. So we're still kind of ironing out the kinks a little bit there about how do we get that initial kickoff kind of team together. The real upside of that process, though, is the admin overhead of resource management has really dropped. Like, I'm not really saying, oh, this is a 3-day thing, this is a 2-day thing. We need to fit it into this 3 weeks. We won't have to worry about that anymore. Whatever's top priority, that's what gets picked. It gets delivered as soon as it's ready. That's the flow, So that's much better. The other thing with using AI, and people don't talk about it too much, is like the waiting screen. So like developers miss developing writing the code. They see the benefits of using AI, but it's kind of frustrating and not very rewarding writing a prompt and then just waiting. So like the job satisfaction after the novelty of what it can do is gonna struggle. So what a lot of people try to do is it's, oh well, I'll kick off one prompt here and one prompt there, and I'll do this other prompt on this other tool I'm working on. But now you've got this like cognitive load that's impossible to manage, and mistakes are going to slip in. So it's kind of like, how do you juggle working with AI without like overtaking your whole day? So I suppose even on what we've done with the process, I still think we're going to have even another pivot of how it works. So originally, when we went with this process, I saw the developer role as fundamentally being like a reviewer nearly. So the AI generates the code, and you have to review it. You have to make sure it's okay. But even that, because of the scale of what the speed of AI creating the code, it's not really practical even anymore for somebody to review it line by line. So I think the next pivot will be, okay, we need a process around how do we actually review it in a meaningful way. And it'll be things like, you have to interrogate the AI. Why did you do it this way? What changes did you actually make? The stuff I mentioned earlier about having like a good, automated test structure and a QA gate wrapped around it. Have a skill that does the code review for you. So a dedicated, specialized AI skill that does a code review. And maybe just a light review of the code yourself, just making sure it looks structurally okay. And then only really, I suppose, if it's a high risk kind of code, so to do with like your authentication or the performance, then yeah, like step in and make sure the code looks clean. But we'll kind of come to the stage now where it's not really practical anymore to do it like line by line. So the review will not go away. Like it's just changed shape. So it's the same judgment, but now applied through like interrogation, testing, AI quality reviews instead of like every line.
And that's really the crux of like the problem. Like AI's capacity to go fast is like incredible, but there are cases where you can't risk the 5% errors like being shipped, right? If that happens, it could undermine the trust in everything. I'm relating that when I say that more to like survey programming side, which we've also leaned into on the AI creation side. And currently we are in the process of revamping our QA process in that future mindset, but again, perfect example where zero errors, zero mistakes can be afforded when you launch that and present it to a flood of survey respondents, right? So, yeah, there's this marriage of speed and quality that right now, the way we're solving it operationally too is just to make sure the human is the owner and the accountability, but not trying to tether so much of the speed around latent windows and queues of QA, right? That is kind of like the organizational challenge moving forward. All that requires experienced hands though, by the way, right? So this is like,
I think that whole like human in the loop methodology still holds today. Like it might change in the future, but at the moment, I still think you need to be at least watching what's happening and be the final kind of like sign off before something actually goes.
yeah, 100%. Ultimately, it's the accountability part, right? You want great talent, super experienced, who know what great looks like and can consistently make sure that whether it's AI or not, that that is delivered for the client. Um, So yeah, I guess when I look sort of toward the future a little bit, um, the AI workflows, one thing I've noticed just myself kind of digging in, dabbling in the product dev world with you is the models variations have led to a lot of inconsistency in the output. So I'm just curious as whether it's Anthropic or whatever people use as they evolve their models and degrade past models or They're emphasizing more on the business and the token optimization side to keep up with their debt requirements and their cash. Like, what's a great way do you think we can think about the idea of accommodating model change in the output performance as it sort of wanes or maybe improves? Like, how do you build that into the workflow on the dev side?
Yeah, and it's a whole new kind of, I suppose, world for like the QA person, you know? Um, so and it's critical because not only is it before you control your changes to your code. So you say, okay, we're releasing this, can you test it? But now sometimes they will remove a model. So like no longer we can use this version, we have to upgrade to a new version. And like you said, that can totally change outputs. So how do you know that that change in output, it's not a deterioration in quality, that like you've benchmarks there? And also, even when we are changing ourselves and we make a little small tweak to our prompt or a small tweak to our inputs, the knock-on effect to the output, like how do you test it? Like it's not like a deterministic where this input is that output, and you can say, yeah, it's correct, tick it. So what we have in place now is we do have kind of a benchmarking system, and uh, all our stuff is hosted on AWS, and they have a tool which allows us to have different versions of the prompt layered on top of different versions of different models. So you could say it's a different same prompt on these two different models, or it's the different prompt on different whatever kind of chop and change that you want. And then you basically run through like a kind of a set of data that you have. And then it will use AI as a judge to compare the quality of the outputs. And then it will give you a score and say, if you change your prompt, you're going to get, worse results overall or better results overall. And sometimes it's just about staying consistent. Sometimes it's just the knowledge of knowing, yes, we can upgrade to this model and it's not going to break stuff. Sometimes that's all you kind of need because, like I said, it's kind of out of your control now a little bit when these things change.
So for me, what in with that in mind, just to kind of share as we wrap up here, but as we think about the navigator, I think where we landed as a business with the navigator is AI is going to be a driver of future feature functionality, but we're not making the capability and the efficiency of navigator 100% reliant on an underlying AI model, right? So it's this weird sort of nuance where AI is absolutely instrumental to the growth of the efficiency of what the navigator does for us and our clients. But at the same token, we're not building a dependency in a way that the value would wane or be erratic or volatile because of inevitable model changes. So for us, that's another layer of human in the loop, like having an interior, like secret sauce or best practice or knowledge set, like an expertise layer. That's what we're building in. And AI makes that really efficiently to come to life on the screen. But it's not AI, is not the intelligence behind it. So that's just a case study for everyone in the industry where human intelligence can still trump AI with AI still helping it come to life. So, we expect to do this again and chat again later in the year. We're going to have some big reveals about what we're doing in the Navigator and helping this marriage really cement in our process of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And in the meantime, Gavin, that's a little teaser for a future visit to the podcast. But thanks so much for sharing a little inside baseball on how you upgraded our workflows on the fly in the AI era.
Yeah. Thanks, Terrence. Thanks for having me.